I stand proudly on the shoulders of other trade unionists whose contributions in this august body brought fundamental and significant improvement to our working people. That tradition, I believe, is one that ought to be continued. And that is my advice to the honorable member, my colleague sitting on the other side of the House. Mr. Speaker, my first intervention in this House is indeed special as I speak to the 2020 national budget, which would impact upon the lives of every Guyanese and align our development trust with the needs of our people. Mr. Speaker, much was said by the other honorable members across the House. One has to be reminded, and the teachers must be remembered about this, that it was under the previous PPPC administration government that the teachers union were able to have agreements after agreements. As compared to the APNU AFC, when teachers stood up rightly for their rights, what were they told? Greedy, selfish. What a shame. I just wish to advise the honorary member that, sometimes we need to remember our friends. And in so doing, as trade unionists, we ought to respect what is right for our members. And when one talks about, better life under the AFC APNU government, it was $91 billion of additional taxes, which was punishment for the Guyanese people. And that is what one has to fairly look at. We are told that Budget 2020 is private sector friendly, not for the working people. Well, these are people who are speaking without any vision. I don't think they would have listened to Minister Ejel, neither would they have read the budget itself. Maybe they don't understand, that's right. Then we talk about political appointments. And what about bauxite workers and so on? It was the APNU AFC government that caused 30,000 odd people to lose their jobs in this country. Let them say if this is not true. 2017 mid-year, the records show that the unemployment in this country was 13%. Thereafter, a number of sugar workers and others, Barama workers, the dealings with the bauxite people, they left and they're gone, all these jobs. After that, they never published the number again. Shame on them. And then, at that time too, the rate of poverty was 30% of the population. Let them tell us now, under their watch, what are those numbers? Let them say it. Mr. Speaker, one talks about workers' rights and protecting workers. The Guyana Forestry Commission, which had once been a profitable entity, could not have paid salaries for a few months. Bonus of $25,000 awarded in 2018, our honorable minister had to recently bail them out to provide that money so that poor workers could be paid. And then we are talking about the protection of workers and workers' rights. The trade union recognition, it is appalling that you have a trade union recognition board that has not been functioning for many months now. And then the honorable member talks about $60,000 and calls on the minister to make an order. Well, the minister has what is necessary. Two things, which the lady minister couldn't have, and which the former minister maybe didn't have. But our Minister of Labor is going to make that order. of 60,000. Where were you since March 2019, when it was unanimously approved that the minimum wage in this country should be 60,000? Where were you? Mr. Speaker, the re-establishment of the Ministry of Labour is a living example of the PPP commitment to respect the working people and have in place a ministry to address their problems at work. Mr. Speaker, we are told again, I want to repeat, that this budget doesn't have anything for the ordinary people. Mr. Speaker, it was indeed refreshing to listen to my colleague, the Honorable Minister, Juan Ejel, articulating plan after plan, initiative after initiative, and program after program, all geared at improving the well-being of all Guyanese. Certainly, it was a much welcome and marked departure from the budgets we have had in the last 5 years, when Guyanese feared what next would be increased and what else would be taken away from them. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2020 marks the first step in the journey to reverse the vampire-like policies that plague our nation over the last 5 years, when the coalition spared no one except themselves. Guyanese had to pay all the way from the cradle to the grave. That was the life the coalition condemned the Guyanese people to, while their elites flew here, there, and everywhere and benefited from health care in faraway lands. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, many poor Guyanese faced troubled times to put meals on their table and could not get drugs from the public hospitals and health centers. And many of their gains were sucked away by the coalition government. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2020 is a pro-people, progressive budget with significant attention to lifting our working people, putting them to work, and making them and their families comfortable, while building a better and stronger Guyana for our children. Mr. Speaker, this is a budget of hope for all Guyanese, where we will see our nation's prosperity benefiting all and not a few, as we saw during the coalition government. Mr. Speaker, over 30% of the budget has been allocated towards the health and education sectors. This is equivalent to more than $100 billion being spent in probably the two most critical areas of our country. This is a clear signal of the priorities of the vision of a government that cares for its people. Mr. Speaker, as someone who has been closely associated with the sugar industry for many years, and more so, the struggle of the sugar workers, their families, and their communities, the budget was a breath of fresh air. It is no secret, Mr. Speaker, that the coalition purposefully sought to demolish and destroy the sugar industry to their own nefarious ends. This is no other reason. This is no other reasonable explanation for the coalition's attitude to the industry and the tens of thousands who depended on its operation. Sugar production last year was the worst in 80 years. During the life of the coalition, sugar production fell by over 60%. Under the coalition government, which prior to its election said they had all the answers, but certainly they had the wrong answers. Before the closure at the head office, they had 395 persons employed. After the closure, Mr. Speaker, they had 505 people, despite 4 estates being closed. And they're talking about efficiency, and they're talking about um, employment and so on of people. It had to be employment purely for their cronies. You know, you had so many other people and production fell. His Excellency President Mohammed Irfan Ali pledged his commitment to reopen the closed sugar estates and to once more breathe life into those communities which the Granger Nagamutu administration turned into ghost towns. Budget 2020, Mr. Speaker, demonstrates that commitment with the allocation of $5 billion for the sugar industry. Mr. Speaker, over 7,000 sugar workers in the midst of a volatile Christmas season were put on the breadline in a most callous, cruel, and heartless act, described as the largest retrenchment exercise in post-independent Guyana. One could never forget, Mr. Speaker, the December 6, 2017 Stabroek News, the front page screaming out, 2,000 workers sent home at Skeldon. And in that same publication, there was a picture of former President David Granger petting elephants in Africa. What a shame! That was how the working people were treated in this country. What sort of government were they? What kind of leader puts thousands out of work without any plan to deal with the fallout? Didn't they have any compassion for those workers and their families? They were least concerned about how these Guyanese citizens would eat, send their children to school, or pay their bills. If that was not spiteful, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, then tell me what it was. Mr. Speaker, that is not all. That is not all. The Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Zulfikar Mustafa, has already put together a team to commence work for the reopening of Skeldon, Rose Hall, and Enmore estates. In fact, the Honorable Minister, accompanied by union officials, including yours truly, along with technical personnel, visited the closed estates for meetings with people. Mr. Speaker, the dark clouds and hopefulness which hovered over the sugar industry over the last 5 years will disappear as the dawn of a new era unfolds under this PPPC government. Mr. Speaker, what we saw on the ground was nothing short of criminal. Billions of dollars in equipment was left to rot in the sun and rain by this APNU AFC when they were in government. I am heartened that this PPPC government have begun the process to have a capable board of directors with a competent management team. The industry has several possibilities for success. Opportunities for electricity production, refined and packaged sugar, alcohol. I hope my comrade over there is listening. And bottled molasses, among other things, assure of a successful and viable future. Over the last 5 years, much was lost, and the sustained efforts to restore the industry's viability was torpedoed by an unsympathetic administration who certainly didn't understand or possibly did not care about sugar's importance, not only to its workers and their families, but to our entire nation and economy. Among their sins was 5 years, no increase in pay to the sugar workers. For 5 years, notwithstanding all state employees receiving increases each year. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I must compliment our team of the PPPC administration, who undoubtedly worked tirelessly to bring this budget in a short period, despite the challenges they confronted. Foremost must have been COVID-19, which, like sugar, was badly bundled by the coalition, is only now being proactively addressed, with billions being channeled to bring relief and to heighten our response. I see too the budget making active efforts to address the infrastructure deficit and the paucity in government services too. These are welcome developments which will redound to all our people. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, this is a budget of hope. It brings Christmas in September. Budget 2020 has something for everyone and is indeed a true plan for prosperity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member.